Security had been very tight across Paris since the Charlie Hebdo attacks that happened way back in January, at the highest security alert in that city since then. There had been no special notices over the past few days, no word of any increased terror chatter, but certainly security was as tight as it has been in Paris in many years. John Bussey is the associate editor for the Wall Street Journal and live with us on set this morning. They were very secure.
They were trying to be, and it didn't work. And back in January, they had a very bitter experience. Those attackers had been surveilled. Then they ran out of resources to keep them under surveillance. They went on their way and they launched this attack. And the French were determined not to let that happen again. And so they ponied up a lot of money. They put thousands of soldiers on the streets to protect hard targets, synagogues, other government offices. They spent hundreds of millions of euros expanding their surveillance system, ran into all sorts of resistance from civil liberties groups, but got through programs that required very little judicial oversight for them to sift through internet, emails, phone calls. And yet they didn't pick up these guys in operation, which goes to show, Shep, how difficult it is with fluid borders. Europe's borders, remember, are open. France's too, until tonight, when they were shut down as a result of this attack. With these fluid borders and people moving back and forth, how difficult it is to stay on top of the many different potential individuals who might launch an attack.
We can't know for sure at this hour exactly what security was like in that concert venue, but I can tell you, if you were to go to a concert of this kind, a rock concert with a bunch of young people at a venue in New York City, as by way of example, security would be very tight. In many cases, you'd have metal detectors. In all cases, you'd have security at every door. And from everything we've been able to pull together, at least so far, that wasn't the case there. And that's surprising.
Yeah. And you know what's going to happen? That this attack, because it was successful by these attackers, is going to be used as a recruiting tool by whatever terrorist organization that launched it. Then the government's going to crack down, and there's going to be all sorts of friction with Islamic groups in France and elsewhere in Europe, and that too is going to spur resentment and will be used by the terror groups to recruit additional individuals. You know, dozens of French have left France to go to fight in Syria, and that's why France launched those attacks back in September against targets in Syria, quite worried that the Syrians, and it had picked up intelligence that the Syrians were training Europeans, French nationals, to come back to attack France. With all that intelligence, with all this effort with the U.S. and Britain, they still were not able to figure out that this group was preparing these attacks.
You're describing, at least for the moment, what has been thus far an unresolvable cycle where there's an attack, there's a response, there's tightening, there's confusion, and there is disagreement about how to handle it. Then that means more recruiting, and more recruits come in, and it happens again, and that sounds like a cycle.
Yeah, it does feel like a cycle, and it feels like a spiral down, doesn't it? And that suggests that countries are going to be looking at this, and they're going to be looking at the lack of success. Remember, the White House today came out and said that they felt that ISIS was contained in Iraq. It had not been decapitated yet, but containment was there. Those were the words used by the White House. They're going to have to rethink that now that this attack was launched in Paris. If it wasn't ISIS, it was some other related terror group. This is suggestive that you will see a bigger effort by a lot of nations to begin to think through a new way of addressing this problem. Maybe it's going to be more attacks in Iraq and Syria. Maybe NATO is going to take its eye off of Ukraine and collectively focus on the Mideast. We're probably going to see some evolution in the way that global powers are dealing with this problem, because they're going to have to come to the conclusion after Paris that what they're doing now is not working.
Interestingly, in the last few seconds, we've gotten words from Iran's President Rouhani, Iran's president coming out condemning this, calling it an inhumane crime. The Iranians.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that is just illustrative of the difficulty in the Mideast right now. The Iranians are or are not our friends. They are in the fight against ISIS, but that's only because ISIS is intruding into their own terror groups, Hezbollah, in the Mideast. It's not exactly a sort of a warm and fuzzy embrace by the Iranians.